Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Melissa Castro, and I'll be your moderator for today. Uh, Special thanks to the Startup Boston team for having me and for organizing such a stellar panel. So I'm the Business Development Director at Commonwealth Kitchen, a food business incubator here in Boston, where I oversee access to markets. Essentially, all that means is finding sales opportunities for entrepreneurs who are predominantly women, immigrants, and people of color. I'm also the founder of my own venture, La Conexión, where I curate authentic experiences for food lovers and provide food and beverage consulting to small businesses. Super excited to be here today with all of you. Just to kind of give you a recap of what the discussion will be today, we're going to start off with brief introductions from our panelists, then followed by a dialogue centered on how startups can maximize engagement in order to keep its community continuously feeling invested in its product and services. And then finally, after the panel discussion, we'll open up the floor to some Q&A from our audience members. So for introductions, Anna, why don't we start with you, telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Super happy to be here. My name's Anna Palmer. I am co-founder of a company called Dough. We're a marketplace for women-owned products, a little bit like Etsy meets women-owned. Through that, a lot of experience building that community. And then prior to that, I was CEO and co-founder of Fashion Projects, built a community of thousands of nonprofits and hundreds of thousands of donors to that. And then also I'm an investor at X Factor Ventures, a female-focused venture fund.
Awesome, thank you. Anuj?
Yeah. Hey, so I'm here because I met Steph years back when I was at this little company called Growth Hackers, which I'm very happy to rep today because I have their logo on, because that's where I got my start. We built this really nice, big, vibrant community of hundreds of thousands of people trying to understand what the hell is this growth and growth hacking thing, right? And is it a way for me to spam people? But it is not. It took that knowledge over to another company called the Predictive Index, where we sort of almost replicated that strategy to launch a brand new category of products. And I moved on to a really small company after that called Jamber, always on brand, which sells these little mugs. It's used mostly by older people, and we're trying to see, if we can do something about, especially now when people are so isolated, and try to build community there with hands as the centerpiece of that. So I'm sure there'll be a lot to share.
Thank you. Shamir, last but not least.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everyone. It really is a pleasure to be here. And so my name is Shamir Ozeri. My job title is Marketing Programs Director at Algorand. Algorand is a local blockchain company. I'm originally from Israel. I've spent some time in Michigan. I moved to Boston a couple years ago. I define myself as a growth marketer. So hat tip to Anuj, who actually doesn't know this, when he mentions 100,000 plus community, I was one of those community members. So big fan on that front. I had a chance to teach entrepreneurial marketing at University of Michigan, more recently digital marketing at Northeastern University. And I'm, again, very, very passionate about community building. In Michigan, I had the chance to run, I got into blockchain back in 2014. So I ran the Michigan Ethereum meetup. And then one of the first things I did when I got to Boston was start meeting people and starting to kind of build the momentum for the Boston Blockchain Association. So again, big passion of mine, and glad to be here.
Awesome, thank you so much. Welcome to all of our panelists. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right into it. I think we know that having a strong community for your startup is essential for growing your business. I'd like to kind of hear from our panelists, can you tell us, how does one begin to build a community for your startup when you don't really have a following yet? I know it's challenging at the beginning, but Anuj, can you start us off by answering our first question?
Yeah, so for me, it really helps to think of community the same way you think of product, right? When you're first launching a product, like, you're not going to have millions of users show up day one. Right? It starts with the very first person. And the minute you have one other person who shares the same passion as you've started your community, right? And just as you find more and more people who resonate with the same ideas that you do, just as you would with product, right? This is how you find product market fit. You find these really passionate people who have this burning need and desire, and who wanted this thing yesterday in their lives. So there's a bit of hand-to-hand combat to find these people and build that really white-hot core. It really does take more time than you think it does to find these people. It's painful. But when you do, the foundation that you build is what then allows for these people who are so passionate for it to then start spreading it amongst everybody they know, because it's so critical in their lives. They can't help but share it with others they know that need it. And so I think this works great if you have sort of external facing communities, because you certainly can have internal ones as well. Right. So whether this is anything like, you want to build like an ambassador community for building advocates, or whether you're gathering people who want to just contribute information or goods or services to make something even better, or if it's just around an interest, or if it's ideation and feedback, whatever it may be, having that initial sort of why are these people here together, identifying that core why and the purpose, and then building those very intentional first foundational people in the community, I think is what lays the groundwork for success.
Right. So your first community member is just as important as the many that you're going to get after that.
Probably even more important, because without these people, just living and breathing this thing every day, it's right. Not going to catch fire the way it should.
Yeah. Anna, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say, to your point of it being almost even more important, I think the people that you cultivate in that very first cohort of your community, ultimately, that's what your community then will look like. And so spending time being really intentional about what that makeup is, and is that cultivating the right values and the things that you want for your company. So like with Doe, when we were thinking about that, we really focused a lot on diversity early on and making sure that that community reflected what we wanted the broader marketplace to be. Because if you don't start with that and start with your core values, as that community grows, it's going to grow like the people that you first had. And so I think that was a great point, Anuj, that it's just so important early on.
Yeah. Thank you. Shamira, do you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, I mean, echoing everything that Anna and Anuja just said, I think, the way I look at it, it's really less about, right, what you want your community to do and more about what your community wants to do and how that aligns with who you are. And really, so it's, at the end of the day, it's you need to ask yourself, what is the mission, right, that brings everyone together? What are the values that you stand by? Again, to kind of give a concrete example with the Ethereum Michigan meetup. So Ethereum is a blockchain protocol that's all about open software and inclusivity and education and building a better future. So I think what struck us pretty early when we were starting just to put, together a basic meetup together was how motivated everyone was and how aligned, how like we had that language in common. Right. And then it was really a matter of building on that and just facilitating that amplification, right, for people, letting them express it, getting feedback. Right. So again, back to growth, back to marketing. It's all about, building, measuring, learning. So in this case, it's collecting and better understanding what people want to do, and then, kind of facilitating that growth with them and for them.
No, that's super helpful. So let's stay there for a little moment. I think the strategies are just as important. Can you kind of share, I think you gave us a great example, but any other proven strategies that you've seen work to kind of maximize that engagement and continuing to improve those interactions with the members?
Yeah, I mean, I can start with, again, just giving people a platform, right? So a meetup is a great simple example, right? Where today it might be virtual, right? Last year it wasn't. It really was as simple as saying, oh, you have a story. You're working on a startup, in the blockchain space. Why don't you share that story with us, right? And kind of dedicating that, or adding a chance for people to introduce themselves, right? Startup Boston has it with Slack right now. Yeah. So people can just go there and find, people that they have some things in common with. It's asking them, who do they want to hear from, right? And then actively pursuing. those kinds of engagements. So really, when we talk about community, right, as we said, it's more about the values, the mission, the identity, what it means to be, for me, to be a part of this thing that is bigger than myself. So as someone who tries to, again, quote unquote, build community, because I don't feel like people are the building blocks, right? At the end of the day, we're kind of facilitating that growth, that building of sorts. So it really is a matter, I think, of listening and then implementing and trying out different things until you're kind of, seeing what's working, what's creating a little more traction, and what's talking to these people that you're having the conversation with.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think you had mentioned Slack, but
Yep.
Are there any other tools that you've seen work really well for building this community?
So, I mean, I can speak for blockchain, and I don't want to hog the conversation. I'll hand it off. In blockchain, it evolves really quickly. So 2 years ago, for example, Telegram was a very, very popular channel. Everyone had, it's become kind of convoluted, I think, in many ways. So then, the way you might want to think of it is different circles. Where you might have Slack might be good for the kind of the diehard, right? Like totally engaged people that want to communicate with each other. Twitter is a wonderful tool in the blockchain space. For developers, we've seen Discord be very effective, right? So also kind of a messaging platform that's geared more towards gaming and the developer-oriented people. Even things like meetup.com, as I mentioned, right, which is essentially kind of it's an MVP of sorts, right, for a landing page where you can quickly put something up there and and see who's part of it and message and keep communication going. Those are just a few that come to mind. I'm curious to hear and learn more from Anna and Anuj.
Anuj, any strategies or tools that you would recommend or that you've seen worked on your side?
Yeah, and you're going to hear me go back to the product analogy a lot, because this is really how I was taught to think about it, because it's not this separate thing. I mean, the community is literally an extension of the product experience. And that really helps solve a lot of problems. And just as with product and with early product, talk to your users sort of thing. It's shocking how often this doesn't happen. There's this mantra in the product space, right? Is build something people want, right? And you find that out by asking people, like, why are you here? Simple questions is what would give you more value. But if you never do that, I mean, it sounds blindingly obvious and simple, but most people don't do this, and then assume that magic will happen when you really need it to be this very intentional thing. And you don't need a specific platform necessarily, because the platform is just a tool. It can be anything, and it will evolve, to Shamir's point. Right? I mean, you can go as far as Growth Hackers went with building its own platform because we wanted complete control over the entire experience, to a Facebook group, to a Slack channel, or whatever. But I think it's more important to hone down on what delivers value to the people that show up here. Even better if that aligns with the value of the business. And the only way you'll find that out is to ask, why are you here? And more importantly, why do you keep coming back? And once you find that out, do more of that, which is your growth hacking lesson in a nutshell.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. So once you have this community, is there a way for entrepreneurs and founders to measure impact and metrics? Are there KPIs or certain metrics that we should be paying attention to?
Yes. So in my ideal world, the value the community provides should align with the value of the business. Right? And which, of course, by definition means you need to understand what is the value our business even provides in the first place. Right? And so this is what's almost commonly referred to as a North Star metric for the business. Right? And it's different for everybody. But whatever the community then lands up doing, whatever metrics you measure the success of, have to then feed into the overall value delivery of the business, right? So let's say if Google has its own community, right? I mean, Google's North Star metric is the number of searches people do every day. Right? So if they had a community of, maybe it was people who were PPC experts, for example, right? Their whole thing is, how do I make ads more relevant to people searching? Because if those get better, that's how Google makes money, right? And so I think you have to think very specifically about to the point made earlier, is what is the purpose of this community?
Mm-hmm.
So like, for example, if it was a customer support type community, right, you'd want to be looking at, does this help decrease support costs? Does it increase retention? Does it help increase NPS? Because all of those, in theory, those are going up. People are using the product more, and that is impacting value delivered, business impact, right? So, and that changes depending on the kind of community you have. So if you have like a brand ambassador community, you want to be looking at how many new signups are coming as a result of this community. What's the number of referrals? Is there a change in sales revenue? Is marketing spend going down? Right, and all of those roll up to a business impact, which again should help value delivered go up, and which is what then tells you that your community is playing its part in not only helping the business succeed, but it's helping everybody who's around the business, for whatever purpose it is, succeed as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Anuj. Curious to hear, Anna, from your perspective with Doe, what metrics are you kind of tracking when it comes to community engagement, and how do you do that on a day-to-day?
Sure. So our entire platform is about supporting women-owned businesses. So that's everything from social shares to try to get them more exposure, to actually spending. We just launched the full marketplace, so you can now shop on all these businesses on Doe. Last week, I have to get that plug in since Anuj is drinking his coffee and plugging his company every single time. And so we're tracking both how much are people talking about these businesses, what does that marketing look like on Instagram, social shares, et cetera, and then also what are the dollars that are being driven back to these women.
I love that. Shamir, any insight there from your end?
I mean, no, I think my angle is a little bit different from Anuj's and Anna, because honestly, I've kind of started with community. Again, Boston being an example, I moved here, I didn't know anyone. I was trying to figure out how do I find like-minded people, right? How do I find people, again, whose values align with mine? How do I find people who will educate me, teach me, right? And kind of provide that personal growth, right? So it was less about kind of using community, which is, by the way, right, the topic of this panel, using community to grow your startup. It was really more about, honestly, right, growing myself and finding a network of people that I can have meaningful conversations with. So, I think for us, when we built the Boston Blockchain Association, it was very, basic preliminary metrics, and getting back to KPIs. That's also something that will evolve as your business grows, as your community grows. So, at the very beginning, it really was how many people are signed up to our meetup page. It kept going into, how big is our email list? How many people are signing up to our events? How many people are actually attending our events? And then you can start looking at things like corporate sponsors, right, which is maybe more analogous to, a real business. And just the, maybe even simple things like hashtags, right? I saw that someone, here put in the chat what hashtag to use for Startup Boston week. Those are, again, I don't want to get tied up to those specific ones, right? Because as I mentioned, they evolve. It's case by case. Mm-hmm. Occasionally, right, you have to be careful not to fall into vanity metrics, which are kind of those metrics, website traffic, certain impressions, things that might indicate or might, like, yeah, those are growing, right? But at the end of the day, I do think you need to ask yourself, how are those moving the needle, right? So if it's for a business, all the KPIs that were mentioned are great. If it's just for the community within itself, right, you do want to be kind of tracking the different elements of it and the growth within them, month over month, quarter over quarter, whatever's right for you.
Thank you. So I know it can be extremely challenging to convert casual users into what we love to call brand advocates. Any advice on how to identify brand advocates for your business when you're first starting off? Shamir, you want to go ahead and take that one?
Yeah, it's with brand advocates. I'll give an example actually from Algrand. So I work at Algrand Inc. We build the software. Actually, the brand and the community side, ironically, are on the Algrand Foundation side of things. So the Algrand Foundation is really in charge of the ecosystem and driving it. It starts with brand ambassadors. And the way to identify them is, to Anuja's point, right? Simply have conversations with them. That was one of the first things that I did when I joined Algorand. It was really to have conversations with these people and understand what is driving them. Is it our amazing tech? Is it the vision of where the world will be in 5 years going forward? Is it because they want to be a focal point in their community, and this is something that can give them some leverage? Maybe it helps their business that they own, right? So I really think, again, it gets back to customer discovery, having conversations. Inevitably, a lot of the conversations you're going to have are probably not maybe going to lead to something or give you necessarily the information that you want. But if you do enough of them, you start seeing patterns, and kind of that will educate you on decision making at a macro scale. But then throughout those, the people who will likely give you the information that you're actually asking for, they're the people that you want to cater. They're the people that you want to serve. They're the people that you want to empower. So I just say start there, right? If you're talking about a community, you probably have an idea of what it's about, what those values, what that mission is. Have those conversations, and again, give people the platform, right? It's more about distilling, in my mind, the things that they're trying to do in a kind of a very clear, concise, and communicative way, and then almost moving out of the way, right, and letting them do the work. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Super helpful.
I have one tactical thing to add to that, actually.
Yeah, go ahead, Anna.
So one of the things we did with Doe really early on, since we're a consumer company, is we realized our audience was very much on Instagram. And so we went out and asked, to your point of just go ahead and talk to people and find out, we asked who would be interested in potentially being a brand ambassador, and we created something that we called a digital rally. And we realized that everyone had a different reasons why they were supporting women-owned businesses. And so we physically sent shirts that said "Determined We Rise" to just about 200 people or so, and assigned them a certain slot on Instagram of when they should post and hashtag and all of these things. And so we knew that there was consistent coverage throughout the day. And it was a really fun way of having those people then starting to see who the other people in the community were, and then they could actually physically, see the picture of the person, realize that they're supporting the same thing, and read the why. And then that ultimately grew the community from there. And so if you're a consumer company, if you find out where your audience is, I really believe in taking it a little bit into the physical world, because it makes that connection so much more tangible.
I love that. And I kept myself unmuted just to kind of add to that. You're right. So first of all, swag works, but that's just a tactic, right? What we're really talking about is going the extra mile and giving them more than what they're expecting to get, right? Really, again, it comes down to empowering them and making them feel special. That's what it comes down to, right? Giving them that positive feedback.
Yeah, and I think giving them the chance to share their why.
Totally.
To your point, I guess, Anuj, earlier, of not just our stories to what we want from the community, but why are they actually there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll add one more thing here as well, which leans into all of this, is to the whole, asking them why they even show up. The one thing I always love to find out is, what is the greater thing this community or this product is enabling for them, right? And this is not an original thought of mine at all, right? But it is absolutely not about the product. It is not about you. It's all about them and what all of this enables for them. And I think if you keep that at the center of it all and try to discover that, I think that it clarifies the entire path.
I love that. So I'd like to kind of switch gears a little bit. I think, there's been a lot of current events that are kind of transforming the way that we interact with one another and treat each other. I think there's no doubt that COVID-19 wreaked havoc on our families, communities, and businesses across the globe. Also, that Black Lives Matter movement brought forward issues that, have kind of kept our country divided for quite some time. Anna, curious to hear, how does a business support real-time events like Black Lives Matter, COVID-19, in a way that's authentic, but also genuine and doesn't come across as, to be frank, fake.
We've had a lot of communication about this as a team, as you can imagine, for the last 6 months or so. And I think a large part of that just comes back to really knowing your community well. And so I'll give you a real life example. So with Doe, we're all about directing wallet power to women-owned businesses. And so as we're thinking about how do we engage with these different topics, we really use that as the gold star and saying, all right, if this is something that's going on in the world, like Black Lives Matter, how do we create the collections of all the amazing Black-owned businesses and put that front and center and allow people a really easy way to engage, because that's what our community is here for and that's what they want. It gets a little bit tricky when you start blurring the line between political and company. And so where we've kind of thought about that is just knowing our community really well and then being careful that everything for us goes back to that authentic message of how do you support women-owned businesses, and putting all of those current events in that context and allowing our community to engage there.
I love that. And I would also add, at least from perspective at Commonwealth Kitchen, we're always looking for mission-aligned partners. And sometimes these are challenging questions or initiatives to support if you don't know how. I think my advice is always, if you don't know, just say you don't know, and just say, I want to help, I just don't know how. And let that particular company or person lead you the right way. Yeah. Shamir or Anuj, anything you'd like to add to the current events question?
I'll add I'll go back to a product analogy here, especially given how everything has changed. The reason for people showing up might also have changed. Right. And I think while it may be a regular practice for people to survey their community, maybe quarterly or annually, I think especially when there are these periods of just unprecedented change and pivot, I think it's almost like finding product market fit again, and to really understand what the new normal is, and maybe even continue that process more often. Like as long as we are in this sort of new world, just I think continue to try to keep your pulse on, like, are we still continuing to serve the needs as they exist today? Because it truly is unprecedented. Like things have literally changed overnight. The reasons why people buy anything has changed. When they buy has changed. I mean, who knew toilet paper would become a priority in life, right? So I think it's just accelerated and made more frequent that process of pinging the community and keeping more in touch with them about, are we really all truly here for the same purpose, or are we like coasting on some past knowledge?
It's kind of, you're almost forced to reinvent yourself again and again.
Right. And if you don't do this, I think you will see this decline in engagement, because the people that may be looking for you to care about this sort of stuff aren't seeing that come from you. And to your point, even saying we don't know how to deal with this, let's all figure it out together is a great first step.
Right. I'm curious to hear from any of you, yes, in a time of crisis, you have to pivot. But I also wonder, when the needs of your community changes, how do you go about dealing with that? Or have you seen any examples of other companies that have done it in a way that you admire?
We're all deep in thought right now. So I think, one example, like for Doe, I don't think our community needs necessarily changed during the pandemic. However, I think they became progressively more and more urgent. We deal with a lot of small makers or retailers that have physical locations. And so what we saw with the community is that people just needed more connection. They needed to talk to other people about what was going on. And so we started things called coffee chats, which connected all the different women-owned businesses together in groups of about 7 for them just to have conversation. And it wasn't anything major, it wasn't earth-shattering, it wasn't really a part of our core product, but just being able to have that personal connection was something that was incredibly meaningful to help navigate that change. And so I think as you're kind of looking at what are the needs of the community, figuring out if there are things like that you can do that maybe are outside of your core product, that you don't have to pivot everything, but you can start adding in these things that potentially might add a lot of value just for a short period of time.
Love that.
Yeah, you know, I don't have, I guess, a concrete example in mind, but I think to echo Anna's point, at the end of the day, you know, as business owners, as people who sell a service or product, we have to, I think, remind ourselves that really at the end of the day, it's not about the product and it's not about the service. It's about solving a given problem for our audience, right? For our customers. It's about delighting them. It's about helping facilitate change for them, positive change. So I think in the context of everything that's going on, it really is, and again, maybe to distill, right, everything that we said, just don't ignore it, right? Face it, and communicate and understand how whatever that problem is, right, that you're solving for your customers, maybe it affects that, or maybe it affects other components, other aspects of their lives. So to Anna's point, like I'm, you know, inspired by examples like that, where you saw a need, and it's really, again, it's not about what you do, it's about it's about how can you better serve them, right? So you put together these initiatives, and the only way you can do that, again, back to the fundamentals, right, is to talk to them and better understand what they're looking for and where there might be gaps, giving this unprecedented change.
Super helpful, Shamira. Thank you.
I'll just add something that may sound opportunistic, but it is not.
Okay.
Is that especially in times like these, right? I think it really is more about giving and maybe doing things that are, as has been said, not necessarily aligned with the business, but there are people truly in need, you know, and clearly not as fortunate as a lot of the people here with a lot of things, right? And people will remember who were there for them when they did things they didn't really have to. You could argue that that's really, you know, a part of what community should be doing anyway, right? But if it's not, you know, I mean, just take off the sales hat and everything else, you know, for a little bit, and just do, you know, you know, karma will come around.
Yeah, it's so important. Kind of like to take this time and kind of turn it over to some of our guests who have some questions for us. The first one here is from Joe. How do you build a community when social media is gravitating towards more and more advertising? Whoever feels ready to take that on, just let me know.
Yeah, so I think the platform is almost irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. Like, you could have a WhatsApp group, you know, with communities, and there are tons of them already on there, precisely because they don't want to deal with that. Right? They don't want to deal with any of the algorithms. They literally want the engagement driven purely by whoever's on there. They have strict rules, and that's all it is. Like, there are people who, you know, don't want to, you know, deal with Facebook because they don't agree with their policies. You know, just it doesn't matter. I mean, pick Slack, pick whatever it, right? Because again, at the end of the day, the interactions are what's going to, you know, drive value. So if you don't agree with the platform, just don't use it. Like, there are literally 1,000 community platforms you can pick from free to millions of dollars. Right? And in fact, there's, if people are interested, there's this other community organization called CMX Hub. They've actually done research on all the community platforms out there, from cheap to expensive. It's worth giving up an email for if you don't have it, and, you know, just go look through there. But you absolutely don't have to deal with platforms that are getting in the way.
Okay, that's helpful.
And yeah, we struggled with this quite a bit, in that we're not political by any means, but for some reason, Facebook and Instagram keep thinking that supporting women-owned business is. And so periodically they like to just ban us for things when we're like, hey, here's this amazing women-owned company, like, support women with your dollars. Apparently that's political. And so having to navigate that of how do you build the community And then also, I mean, we've gotten shadow banned on Instagram a couple of times because all of a sudden people are sharing stuff more than typically they are. And trying to navigate those platforms are pretty challenging. And so I think had I been able to go back and do it again, to your point, Anuj, I think I probably would have thought about how do you build that authentic community, potentially maybe somewhere else where we had a little bit more control. Unfortunately, we're kind of too far down that road right now to change. But I think it's a really important consideration. So if you can do that potentially off those platforms and have more control, I think it's probably for the best.
Thanks, Anna. We have another question here from Anthony. What are some of the common mistakes that people make when trying to start or grow their community?
I can try answering that. So I think we referred to it before. I think one of the biggest, most common mistakes, and this goes for product and marketing as well, is thinking that you have it all figured out, because you don't. And I think years of experience. I'm sure Anuj can, and Anna can testify to this as well. I think the more experience I have, the more I know that I don't know. Or at least the more I know to recognize that I think I know it right now, I need to go out and validate it. So again, back to the basics, it gets back to, I think, identifying who it is that we're looking to serve, whose vision aligns with ours, right? And having those conversations and really being open, right? So I guess approaching it with a growth mindset and with an open mindset if you're talking more than you're listening, then you should, right, change your approach. You should really, I think, put out the questions, get the feedback, and let that guide you. Let that guide the channels that you're active in through. Let that guide, the material, the content that you put out there, the conversations that you facilitate, etc.
Thank you, Shamir. We have a question here from Sid. How do you help people with community overload? Everything is digital these days. Everything has community. Sure, people will gravitate towards communities that fit their interests. Is there a way to cross-collaborate with other communities? And if so, what's the best way to do so?
I'll answer one part of this,
Mm-hmm.
which if people feel it's overload, again, this is classic product market fit, is if you're truly meeting a need, it's not overload. People will literally keep other stuff aside and come to you,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you're feeling like you've constantly got to, for lack of a better word, harass people into engaging in your community, you likely haven't quite figured out, what the purpose really is. Which is not to say that you don't do this when communities first start, because God knows I've done it to where I've just had a group of 10, 20 people, and I'm like, you will engage because you are my friends, and I will send you pizza. But beyond that, it's if you're ever feeling like you're constantly having to push this boulder uphill, you either don't have the right people in, which again goes back to make sure your initial core is really aligned with what the purpose of the community is as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it truly does take longer than you think it will. It is. There's a reason community management is a full-time job, because it is 24/7 if you let it be. So again, I think to me, it's either you haven't figured out the purpose, or the need is just not that great that you're trying to fulfill with this community, because there's 1,000 others like it. So I think niching down into what is it truly about this that is so unique that meets this one burning need, to me is the key.
Thank you. Anna and Shamir, anything to add there?
Anuj, doesn't every great community start with the 20 people that you're friends with that you're like, you will engage because I will give you pizza?
Oh, hell yes.
I think it's growth hack number one. So I think to your question on the cross collaboration, this goes a little bit back to what we talked about earlier, but if you really know your core purpose of your community, then looking for alignment with the other communities. So example for us would be, we know that our purpose at Doe is what we call wallet power. So we're all about just directing dollars to women-owned businesses. But there's a lot of different ways you can do that. So for us to engage with a community like I Fund Women, which does it slightly differently, where they're directly investing in those companies, or We Are Women-Owned, which runs pop-up stores, so we don't actually have a physical presence. There's a lot of ways of finding communities that can look like yours that you can collaborate with. But I think the important part of that is you have to be really laser focused on what is the value that you're bringing for your community. And once you know that, then you can figure out which are the best ones to then partner with.
Love that. Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think value was mentioned and it's spot on. And then the other thing, we do live in an attention economy, right? We live in a place. I think it's hard to deny that question is coming from a very real place because as consumers, we have trouble deciding where to divert our attention to, right? I think that's a growing problem. Who saw The Social Dilemma, but go see it. It's on Netflix. It talks a lot about this and these kinds of issues. But just, one thing to add. So yes, it's about the value. I think it's also about reducing friction. Again, kind of like with product, right? Where you want to lower the entry barrier as much as you can and make it as easy as possible for people to participate and also facilitate in themselves. So for example, with Algorand, we have ambassadors. So we have a micro grants program, for example, right? That might send them, swag and certain, even like funding, right? To fund whatever activities they have, whatever costs they might incur. And that again, right, makes it easier for them to kind of play that active role. We want to make it as easy as possible for them to do that.
Great, thank you. And I think the next question's for you. Jimena wants to know, she's launching a dog bakery in December 2020, and it's women-owned. How does someone go about selling on your site?
Oh, great, good question. So the website is Join Dough. I will put it in the chat for you. And if you go there, there's a partner with us option that you can click on that, and then you can apply directly there. And then you can upload your products. It's super easy, really streamlined. Only should take about 10 minutes or so. And I'll watch for it now that I know that it's coming.
Perfect, thank you, Anna. Our next question is from Sarah. How do you get over the hurdle of, I don't want to be first, I'd rather wait until others are in your platform?
Yeah, so there will always be early adopters right?
Mm-hmm.
and those that will wait. That's inevitable. The challenge, and this, I will admit I have failed at this more often than I have succeeded, is to deliver so much value that people can't help but want to be part of your platform. Like it's to the point where people are literally shamed into saying, okay, I feel like I'm stealing from these people now. Like I should at least sign up. At the very least, I can't just be a lurker anymore. Right. And again, all of that only comes from understanding true value that you really can deliver to them. Mm-hmm. And to a point Shamir made earlier, which is about making that participation frictionless, and that has a very producty analogy with user activation, right? Where they come and they instantly get, right? Not only these are my peeps, but here's how I can benefit from this platform as well. Right? Which again, there's a lot of testing involved to figure that bit out. Mm-hmm. But if you can do that, right, along with just deluge of, I will make you feel like you are stealing from me, right? And you will join at some point. Like every interaction is just overloaded, with value. Again, easier said than done. Mm-hmm. I think that's what ultimately helps people just say, okay, I just have to. It's stupid now.
We have a question here from Ikea. How do you balance building a community to ultimately sell products without coming across as disingenuous? I feel like I've seen a lot of businesses not hit the mark with this one, and it comes across as inauthentic. I'm curious to hear any of our panelists' thoughts or advice there.
Yes, have you ever seen like the Glossier community?
Yep.
And that's probably one of the best examples I can think of, right? Where literally every member of that community is the hero of the story. I mean, almost everybody I know who uses their products tell me their products are sort of okay, but their community is freaking awesome. Right? Because, you know, their entire mission is about, you know, here's how Glossier makes you look your best, and here's how you feel confident, and here's how you take on the day.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not about it was this lipstick and this whatever at all. And everybody is on their sort of, you know, almost showing off the confidence that they feel as a result of using those products. Right? And I think this applies across the board. I mean, think of the sort of Strava bicycling community, right? Where everybody's literally about, you know, they're leveling up. It's not about the app and it's not about anything else. It's literally they're enabling this greater thing in people's lives, whether it's physical, mental, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think of how many you know, chapters Duolingo has with, you know, learning languages, you know, around the world. I think there was a point they had like, I don't know how many events every week around the world, right? But just that ability to level up with, hey, I can speak Spanish now. Like, how awesome is that?
Yeah.
Right. So I think when you get that right, where people start to feel like, you know, they can literally feel I'm leveling up. I think that's when, you know, I think you hit it.
Absolutely. Anna, were you going to say something to that?
Yeah, there's also a really interesting example of a company called Armoire, which is a clothing rental company. So, I mean, they exist to sell you products. But what they realized is that their community was using their service to feel empowered at work. And so they created this entire boss lady community around it. And one of the products, to your point, Anuj, about community and product going together, that they recently launched is a virtual closet. So their community can try on the different things that they've rented, and then the community can give feedback in a really positive way and saying, oh, that looks amazing, like go off, crush your interview, etc. And so it was a really interesting way of kind of figuring out why people were using their product and then building the community around that. And so if you are looking for a kind of modern example, this is maybe the last couple of years, I would check out that company as well.
Would you mind putting it in the chat, Anna? So I know we only have a few more minutes, but I think before we close, I kind of love to hear from our panelists what they think their key takeaways are from today's conversation and any additional advice they may have to founders and entrepreneurs who are looking to continuing to grow their community. Anna, do you want to start us off?
My key takeaway, I think, is talk to your community. Don't assume that you know what they want or why they're there for. You have to really know them personally and do that often, because there's a chance that might change along the way. So that would be my big takeaway.
Perfect. Thank you. Shamir?
Yeah, again, echoing that, right? As we said, it's really facilitating their growth. I love how Anuj said leveling up, right? At the end of the day, what we're talking about is reaching a new status quo, right? Reaching, there's a goal, you want to be there, whether it's feeling more confident, right? Whether it's making better decisions, getting whatever data, right? So every product kind of facilitates that change. That's the promise, essentially. As long as your community is around those same values, that same facilitation of reaching the new status quo, as long as it's not about you, it's about them. They're the hero of the journey. Another thing, right, that Anuj said, you're in a sense the mentor, right? The person who, or the company, the organization that facilitates that, that sheds light, right, on that new status quo and guides the way. You'll be good.
Awesome. Thank you, Shamir. Anuj, any advice or key takeaways from you?
Yeah, so I don't know if this is advice, but yeah, but one thing, you know, that's always said in the growth world is that there is no silver bullet growth hack. But I think if anything comes close, it's community, right? Because at the end of the day, you know, you'll always have competition, right? And they can always copy your features and offer discounts and all of that. But the one thing they cannot take away are, you know, loyalty and bonds and relationships. Like there's no way for them to replicate that. Right? So literally, I mean, if you have not started yet, start now. No, it'll be painful. The first 10 are the hardest, It gets easier from then on. You will hate yourself for a few months. It's fine. But do it, and do it as fast as you possible. Like, this is literally, to me, your biggest competitive advantage, your biggest moat ever. Like do it now.
And bribe them with pizza, right, Anna?
Pizza, beer, all of it works.
Food works for everything. So panelists, we've gotten great feedback in the comments for all of you. Thank you so much for sharing your advice and your thoughts. And you can't hear it, but we're all clapping. So because of the mute, and all of the attendees, thank you for listening.